You know what writer uh, college professors, and probably high school as well, love assigning? Karl Marx. Karl Marx. I was a political science major and had to read Marx in at least two classes, maybe three. I had a teacher who was a friend who I identified as a Marxist and took me to task one time in my analysis paper on from a Marxist perspective on something that took me to task. Oh, I should try to find that comment. And this was a professor I love, saying Marx was one of the most brilliant philosophers. In effect, I don't know, put words in her mouth, but basically laying out that really Marx is the one who brought all this stuff together and synthesized it and really understood everything. Now, where you don't read Marx is that often is in economics, because Marx, even during his lifetime and his ridiculous labor theory of value, was proved to be totally false, even though these platitudes of Marx are still repeated today, because he's had a few people who don't know economics, usually in humanities and English departments, adopting his class analysis in order to forward their worldview, fit in with the virtuous and fashionable views of their time, and allow them to feel that they are not just teaching but advocates for a cause. And although I will grant that reading Marx or having an awareness of Marx's place in history is important, but I'm not saying that's a good thing. I think that understanding the Communist Manifesto or something, sure, that should be understood as a piece of history. That being said, Marx is highly overrepresented and overrated in the amount that his writings show up in the readings on a college syllabus. And Philip Magnus, who wrote this article that you can look up, and I'll put the link in the description if I remember, wrote this great piece doing something I never thought of. It was something I had recognized experientially, that, you know what, we read a lot of Marx in college, and his writings aren't that great. They're not that great for an English class. It's not like Shakespeare. It's not like Henry David Thoreau. It's not these classical texts of great literature, Mark Twain, or whoever the case may be. He was very prolific. He wrote a lot. But it's more as class analysis. But okay, let me speak to the economics a little bit first. Marx's economic theory of labor theory of value was that, in effect, and this is boiling down to a very basic level, we understand, but was that value was created from the amount of labor put in, and that there was this exploitation of workers, because they would put in this certain value and they'd be working with the materials themselves, and then there would be this surplus value called profit that these the capitalists, the factory workers, were only paying the workers a lower amount than the full value of what they were creating, and then selling it, making a bunch of money, and basically living off of the exploitation of the workers. Okay. Sounds on its face somewhat plausible. But the problem with that is that even in Marx's own lifetime and after, economists did not take this seriously. There was also the marginal revolution that took place in, I want to say, the 1870s, that realized that value was, they placed more of a subjective economic value on it. The value was based on what the consumer decided to ordinarily rank in what they chose to place value on, and that workers could not be exploited in this sense because what was being produced by the capitalists was the capital investment up front, that the companies only made money if the capitalists only made money if the company made a profit. The workers got their money up front. And the labor theory of value fell apart, and no economists really took Marx seriously soon after this. Someone on who I agree with, the Austrian economics would be Mises, but not just people I agree with. John Maynard Keynes, who I thoroughly disagree with economically, famous economist, totally rejected Marx, and so there was a lot of this that was relegated. So not an economist, although that was his writing, was mostly economics. But sometimes in philosophy, he comes up a little bit in philosophy, but really in the humanities, English, and social science departments. And so the punchline of this is actually not to give an explanation of why Marx was incorrect, but why does he show up so much in Syllabi? And Philip Magnus, who wrote this article, did something I never thought of. He went to this website that I didn't know about, that called the Open Syllabus Project, that talked about that professors from all over the United States are freely posting their syllabi online and allowing people to look at it. And you can start to gather data from this. You can start to gather quantities, quantifiable data from this, because it allows you to count up, okay, how often are they talking about Plato? How often are they talking about Socrates? How often do they assign this textbook or that text, or whatever the case may be? Now, what he did was he counted up how often is Marx assigned. And this gave him some empirical data. And so he said that the Communist Manifesto comes up very often. I've read that. It is important to know what that is and the place it holds in history. I'm not debating that. But he says that Marx is actually read, or assigned, at least not read, because I have students too, and I assign readings, and I don't. I've been a student. I also know that I didn't read everything that was assigned. But Marx is assigned way more than any other philosopher, writer in history. Second is Plato. I had to read Plato in philosophy and international relations several times, but I read him pretty much as I read Marx. Marx came up 3856 times. Plato came up 3573, followed down by Aristotle, Hobbes, and then way down here at the bottom, John Locke. I'm surprised that Thomas Paine is above John Locke. But anyway, and that's not saying that all of these guys are right either. I recognize his place in history, but I hate Plato too. And I think, in a sense, these two might have gotten along with their philosophy. Maybe not their class history, but their philosophy. That being said, the point of this, the punchline of Magnus's article and this video, is that Marx is outrepresented or overrepresented in his significance in classes, giving students the impression that Marx was actually right when economically he was wrong. His philosophy was totally devoid. Oh, and by the way, let me throw another economic fact out there. Marx could have recognized, he was busy writing his whole life, very prolific, but he could have recognized even in his own day that his analysis was flawed. But if you question Marxian analysis, it's that you are part of the problem. You're living under this false bourgeois, false consciousness, and you're just part of the issue. You're not able to see. But number one was that Marx, you said that this value came from labor, but then you would expect to see greater production, greater money being made from labor-intensive markets than capital-intensive markets. Labor-intensive markets use a lot more human labor and people, as opposed to capital-intensive markets that use more tools to make them more productive. And capital-intensive markets actually use less labor and make labor much more productive, and therefore are much more profitable and make more money. Totally fails. Now, philosophically, Marx thought he was on the side of all the workers, and that all the workers would agree with him and stand up to this system and throw off the shackles once capitalism came to its end. Then Marxism would be the international communism would be the final results. The workers never responded to this. Okay, so then the Marxian analysis fell apart. It didn't have this classist hierarchy of the workers and the bourgeoisie anymore. So what it ended up focusing on was, what are other ways of division in which we can focus in order to create this class analysis, which brings in the great equalizer of the state in order to correct these injustices. And this shows up now in cultural Marxism in all sorts of forms, namely, whatever theories, feminist theory is a branch of Marxism, social justice, and different things like this that bring up the idea of giving over more power to a centralized state in order to bring about this result because of this class conflict, whatever the classes may be. And it creates division among the people, really empowering the state. But Magnus points out, he says, taken in a cumulative, these data suggest two unusual possibilities. Either A, Karl Marx is the single most important, influential, and far-reaching thinker who ever lived, and his empirically attested syllabus presence accurately reflects this extreme degree of influence he has over virtually all aspects of human knowledge. Or B, Karl Marx enjoys a grossly outsized presence on a college syllabi relative to his importance as a thinker, owing to a similarly disproportionate affinity for his thought among university faculty, and particularly those faculty outside of the economics profession. Yeah, because it's not economists who are taken in Marx, because they know that the labor theory of value is useless, and that was proved wrong over 100 years ago, almost 150 years ago. But they find value in the class analysis in order to forward a political agenda that they already believe in. And so Marx continues to be assigned, his surface validity continues to be shelved out to students and endlessly repeated in these areas of the college campuses, which have no way of quantifying whether he's right or wrong or whatever the case may be. So this is, I don't know what to do about it, other than this is something your tax dollars often are funding in federal education subsidies to pay for English and history and humanities departments to endlessly talk about these useless philosophical ideas of someone who was proved wrong 150 years ago. So it is something to consider. It is something to be aware of for someone considering college, and it's a hobby horse of mine. So that's why I get to make the videos. But it is something to think about if you're going to college, sending someone to college, know someone in college, that the impression that's being created is that Marx is brilliant beyond understanding, and it's really not the case. It's a few intellectuals emphasizing this because it follows with a politically fashionable narrative that they already believe. And so they see it as their duty to continue to get these ideas out there, even though they're false, even though they're wrong, even though they're anti-human and society destroying. It still continues to be believed. So be aware of that. Fight this with true knowledge, and continue reading. Read Marx. I mean, it's not afraid if you read him, but it's not going to create the value that you're thinking in reading it. You see what he said in his own words.